This is just so I understand the process to this afternoon. Hi, everyone, by the way. So anyone who wants to just jump on Zoom, that's how this is working. It's not on YouTube.
Correct.
Not that it matters. I was just curious. So, okay.
And that's the link that is on this board meeting webpage.
Okay, excellent. Do we know, Tracy, is Emily planning on coming this afternoon?
Emily accepted the invite. Oh, there's Rowan.
She's just finding the Zoom link right now.
Oh, okay, perfect. Well, we'll give her a few seconds before we get started. Thanks, Rowan.
Todd is an attendee. Oh, nope.
Oh, great. And Todd's here too. Okay.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Todd.
We summoned you by talking about you, Todd.
My ears were on fire.
Well, welcome everybody. So I think is and oh nope. So our TTSD, did Patty just go under TTSD logo and Lisa? Is that okay? Trying to keep track of my boxes. Thanks, Lisa. So Patty, let me know when everyone that should be able to, join us in conversation has done so. Because I don't see Emily yet. Oh, you're on mute, Patty.
Some people come right in as panelists and some people don't. So I'm letting them in, changing them from attendees to panelists as soon as I see them.
Okay.
Can we see attendees? Because I'm looking at the list and I don't.
If you go down to participants and it should say, pops up a window and it says panelists and attendees. Click on the attendees, it should tell you.
Bingo. All right, thank you.
Okay, so, and attendees are 0. So I don't see Emily yet. So you guys, so why don't we, since it's 4:03. So Rowan, do you think she was in and then bounced out, or?
I think she's still looking for the link.
Okay.
I'll send her another link.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Oh, nope, there she is. Perfect. Okay. I think hi, Emily. So I think Dr. Sue from Cabinet, do you think we're good to go?
Yes, Chair, I believe so.
Okay. Well, excellent. Good afternoon and welcome everybody back. Hope you all had an opportunity to enjoy a little bit of the weekend at least. This evening, Patty, if you would bring up the Arctic community, we will start with that. And what I would that was good, what I would like all the board members to do, which always includes Rowan and Emily in these exercises, to identify with one of the components of the Arctic community, kind of reflecting on what we did last week. And as we move forward in our work today with John and Tara, what resonates with you this afternoon? And I'll start since I'm not on mute. For me, as I think about everything that we covered last week and what a wonderful opportunity to learn from the panel, I will say the last one, we will listen with intention to learn something new. Thank you.
And I'll say that it's, we remember that conversation is a natural way we think together, because I expect that's what we're going to be doing today.
And I'll offer slowing down so we have time to think and reflect, which I think we're all doing a lot of, but especially appropriate with this material.
I'm going to go with we strive to be in community with one another with care, since we will be talking about how to be in community with one another.
I also resonate with, we remember that conversation is a natural way we learn and think together. I guess I added learn, but yeah, so we think together. Just having listened last week to the panelists and kind of had a chance to look up some of the resources, I'm excited now to have conversations about that, what we learned.
I'll offer that we try to stay curious about each other.
I'm resonating with we will listen with intention to learn something new.
Dr. Sue and team, if any of you would like to add to that, please feel free to do so.
Thank you, Chair. Team, if you please take the ball.
Yeah, I would offer, we expect it to get messy at times. Just the work continues and we just keep bearing into some messiness, and it's all coming out good on the other end, but getting there can be kind of messy, which is okay.
Yeah. And for me, having an opportunity to hear from the panelists, all of which, except for one that I have a connection with, reminds me of trying to stay curious about each other and the expertise and our experience that each of us bring, because you know we can always learn something, even if it's not an experience that we share. So that's what I am really been resonating with me since last week.
I would add the one that's resonating with me right now is we acknowledge that we bring our lived experiences into the conversations.
And I am focused right now on we remember that conversation is a natural way we think together.
And I'll add, we slow down so we have time to think and reflect.
I think I'll add that we recognize that we need each other's help to become better listeners. I think that with all of the new things that are happening, understanding that it'll take more than once, twice, maybe 100 times until we finally understand what we're hoping to do together. So that's what I'll offer.
Is there anyone else in the cabinet team who hasn't yet? Patty? Patty says pass. Okay. Anyone else? Then I'm happy to close with, again, listening with intention to learn something new.
Okay. I think, Zini, let me do a check-in. It's 4:09. I'm wondering, before we shift, first of all, thank you for your tremendous work on the community or on the equity pillars, and for us to have a conversation around board engagement with those particular components. I thought we might put up the committees to kind of close the loop on the work that we started at our last meeting and look back on the committee assignments. It was, Jill, thank you, is a effective way to kind of have everyone just put forward the committees that they were most interested in, and then to try to assign based on individual board members' interests. So Patty, do you want to put up the committee Google Sheet, and we'll look at that really quickly? Because Todd, just to give you a heads up, as you know, I reached out and asked you if there were going to be full committee or curriculum reviews, and it looks like it is. So I just thought we would look at the committee assignments and then have you just kind of give a heads up on what you think that the curriculum team will be doing, or multiple teams actually will be doing this year.
Yeah, and I added that. Yes, for sure. I will talk to what we tentatively, just because of the current situation, but we would like to keep moving forward on for sure if we can. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want me to do that now or wait?
Yeah, I think Patty, are you pulling up the?
I'm getting there. I'm just about there.
Okay.
Okay. Just let me know.
So board members, I'll give you a second to look at what you brought forward to Patty as your interests, and then trying to, obviously the highlights in yellow are areas that, and you know what, Tracy, I'll have you also talk about kind of what you're thinking with the health center and the overall health program. So I'll have you add that after Todd's done. So I just wanted to really try to assign 3 to 4, tried to stick with what your most, your highest priorities were. So if you have a concern about any of the yellows, we can talk about that, or we can talk specifically about curriculum and school-based health centers, particularly Tracy, so Ben and Sharon have a sense of what you're thinking as well. So, and then, yeah, so Todd, go ahead.
Yeah, so this year we're hopeful that we can continue with moving forward on a 6-12 health adoption. Again, this is all, let's see how things unfold and that kind of thing, but that would be a hope. It's a need for sure. And we were moving down that path before the shutdown occurred. And then we had just gotten into a pilot. We were going to be piloting Amplify Science at 6th through 8th grade. And that's somewhat in play with TWE, two immersion science classes. Amplify has Spanish curriculum. And so they're actually going to be utilizing that in a pilot format, but then to allow them to offer science as well. And so we'll get a sense from our TWE teachers about kind of this quasi pilot that way, and then try to fold in other teachers as well along the way to see if we can get that taken care of. But that's kind of a pilot side thing that's been working. But we do want to wrap into adoption processes 9 through 12 science, so biology, chemistry, physics, physical science. That we've talked to those 3 groups of folks more readily. We've talked to biology, and we had a summer meeting, and we're at the ready that way as well. So we'd like to try to get to that. So those are the 2 big ones, really: 9 through 12 science, and 6 through 12 health adoption. I would leave it at that. Again, we'll see how this plays out in terms of the situation we're in, but I think we can get after it. We had a great probably isn't the adjective, but what I thought was a good experience with Florida Virtual, our third-party vendor experience in that, and we took folks through a virtual experience in terms of vetting, and we learned a lot from that, and I think it's telling us we can potentially move forward with those 2 areas that I talked about, health and science.
All right, Todd, thank you. And Todd also confirmed for me, I still haven't highlighted, I didn't get those taken off or had a strike through, but library will not be an active committee at this point in terms of board participation. So for Karen and Jill, those would just not be, active committees. And so I guess, Ben, Jill, Karen has, committed full days. I wonder, Karen and Ben, or Jill and Ben, if you want to trade off back and forth to participate when you can, but those can be, lengthy, hours long meetings. So I'll, yeah, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, so since the library committee is not meeting anymore, I think Jill should have 3 committees. So I think curriculum, I'm more than happy to have Jill be the delegate to the curriculum committee with Karen.
Okay. And then Jill, I guess, you know, if you're not attending something, give Ben a heads up to see if that's something that he could participate in.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is early learning going to be meeting this year as
Yeah,
well?
Dr. McCall, I was going to say, thank you if you could enlighten us on, because I highlighted and I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't hear back from you. So I'll let you go ahead and explain that as well.
Well, before I get started, some exciting news. As you know, we applied for slots through SSA for one classroom. And so we were informed that because they went to the second tier, we will be getting a preschool promise classroom. And so that's really good and good news. We're still waiting from the state, the details of that. I'm sure they're kind of backed up with everything with opening schools guidelines, but that is great news. And so we will have a committee this year. And on that committee, we have Susan Salkihel, Christina Kurtz, and we also have several of our elementary principals on that committee as well as some teachers. And so some of the things that I will put into the chat, and Jill, I did send a Google Doc with just an overview of things that we'll cover under the Early Learning Committee. I can also put it into the chat here. But what we're planning to do is increase the number of sites where Juntos Aprendemos is offered by 2. And we're also in the process of working with Latino Network. And again, planning opening up the preschool promise classroom, whether it's in person or virtually. And then what's exciting, and I'm happy to be a part of that, the work that Karen Twain started with the team is planning and preparing the opening of the Early Learning Center. That's a lot of work, but it's so exciting. And then we plan to move TTSD, the pre-K at Tualatin Early Learning Center to Tualatin Elementary. And then we have a plan for a new pre-K TWE class at Mesker. And then we're going to continue curriculum exploration and alignment planning process. And so usually that, last year we had 2 committees, and we're really going to merge them into one with that curriculum planning. And we anticipate at least 4 to 5 meetings, but as soon as we get our team to scheduling, we'll get that information out to you. But for now, I'll just put that overview into the chat for all of you to look at. Any questions for early learning?
Dr. McCall, did I say that we've got 2 sites with Juntos this year?
We're gonna, yes. We're gonna, yes, at Deer Creek and Templeton, we're gonna increase.
So 2 new.
2 new sites, yes.
Okay. For a minute there, I thought you meant we'd cut back to only 2 sites.
No,
District
2 new, no, 2 new sites.
Good, excellent, thank you.
Yeah. And I will just share this Google Doc with all of you.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. McCall. And then I think then, Director Rose, if you would like to just briefly touch on what you're thinking, kind of the committee around, you know, our health centers or what that might look like. And then that would be, at this point, Ben and Sharon, so.
Yes, and I have not had a chance to circle back with Director Kent yet, so surprise. This was when Maureen sent out the list today. I just threw out a suggestion that if we had a committee that was dedicated to our school-based health center, perhaps it could be a little bit broader in scope to include the contracts that we have with partners that like LifeWorks, which came to mind, that we work with relative to mental health and other services dedicated to health and wraparound for our students.
So Ben and Sharon, feel free to chime in. I thought any way to kind of try to break silos, so you kind of had a whole perspective of what we're doing for student health would be a good thing to try to incorporate that and set a charge for the committee. But Ben and Sharon, any questions you have for Carol or for Tracy, this would be great. Otherwise, we'll go forward with these assignments.
I don't have any questions. I don't have any questions.
You're muted, Maureen, but yes, me neither. And I'm excited to serve on the committee.
It's not even 4:20 and I've done that twice. So thank you both. And this is great. Okay, so for right now, given our particular committees, and Ben brought up an excellent point that we'll, I think, talk more about as we head into equity and certainly throughout the year. As we look at what are our opportunities as we want to recruit individuals to come on the board, how do we create that balance for folks that don't have the level of flexibility that many of us do during our day. And so I think it's really important that we be mindful of that. But I think right now we need to be thinking about that kind of moving forward with some of the work that we have done in past years, but having those thoughts in parallel as we move forward. So Patty, thank you for putting that up. I think we're good to go. And then if you would put up Zinnia's work on the equity pillars, that would be perfect.
I don't know that I have that, do I?
It should be in Google Docs or on the drive.
Is Zinnia on? Zinnia, can you share it?
Sorry, I got booted. Yes. Are we sharing the equity document?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll be right back.
So board members, did you all have a chance to look at Zinnia's document to kind of walk through the pillars and then how she's aligned that with potential for board members?
I have not.
So why don't we give a couple minutes for you guys to walk through. So Sharon, did you have it in your inbox? So yeah, so Zinnia, I don't know, is it better just to be silent and let you guys read, page 1, page 2, if that's helpful? So Zinnia, do you want to pop up to the first page just for a minute and let people kind of get grounded? Thank you so much.
Yeah, would you like me to also put it in the chat so folks can grab it?
Yeah, that would be great. And Rowan and Emily, this is work, with our students, with our community. If there's an opportunity that you have a particular interest in a pillar, I also want to invite you, to, if something, fits an interest that fits, post, 4 o'clock or something like that, that it would fit your schedule, to certainly, speak that interest and see how that could potentially fit going, forward in the year as well.
Rowan's internet booted him, but I'll let him know that. Yeah, I think he's trying to fix it right now. But yeah, thank you for offering that.
Well, Emily, you get first choice. No, I will, when Rowan gets back, we'll circle back. So board members, when you're ready, kind of just give me a thumbs up or something. And I don't want to rush you, just trying to figure out a way to know when you're ready to move forward.
Yeah, and I just want to give folks a heads up that the first page is what we all use to review critical questions about equity lens in schools, in our district, and so forth. The second page is not an exhaustive list of what can happen to operationalize the things that we see on the first page. And then below that are some potential opportunities for the board to engage. So I think I got a thumbs up either visually or on chat. So I'll go down to the next page.
Good.
So Zinnia, is it your thinking that one or two board members would take each of these areas?
Yeah, I think my first thought was, you know, the thing that we were talking about in a lot of our committees and a lot of just equity work is the modeling that all of us needs to be a part of this work. And I think even in conversation, so with Emily and with Rowan, we had already talked about some ways to support student voice and community engagement. So they're already like involved. And I think that is a wonderful model of what it's really going to take for us to make this work sustainable. And I think it's one of those things where this work is so all-encompassing and interconnected that it would be good practice for the board to work in a like de-siloed way as well, and just like in our departments and so forth. So the way that I was thinking about it was, you know, Karen was great. She was able to go to like all the things almost like that we were able to, you know, offer, but to we're going to be intentionally doing a lot of different focused things. And so it would be very beneficial for there to be a rep for some of the pillars, and then come together as you do your board reporting and here's what's happening, so that a community as well as the board has a cohesive understanding of how all these pillars are working in conjunction with one another, especially as we talk about, you know, the EASH plans, the ways of reviewing our policies, because part of that board work is to offer the different perspectives that each of the pillars will be giving, so that as you're sitting and reviewing policy and adjusting, adapting, that you have that at the forefront of your mind. Does that make sense? So that's what I was thinking about. If anybody else wants to add to that thinking, that would be great.
So would there be a way, Zinnia, would there be a way for us to participate in multiple pillars for that broader experience or exposure without making it a big mess for you for not violating public meeting law? I don't know if anybody has any ideas about that.
I think Maureen did. Maureen, I think you were talking about potentially, yeah. So if you want to talk about that.
Sure. So what I was thinking is that we would have one board member to each pillar, and I would defer. And so Sharon, what I think is a lot of that work is going to cross over multiple pillars. So if it's, community and students, or whoever the board person on that pillar, that could be too, right? So because I'm really we have to figure out a better way than every meeting being a public meeting so that all of us can participate. It's time to do a course correct. So what I was willing to do is say, 4 of you, where is it that you'll land? Be there if it makes sense that it's kind of a pure pillar, if you will, and that I could participate, I would, right, as a second. So we're still not doing public meeting stuff. And again, I think the equity work is a district committee that we are participating on, right? This is kind of driven by Zinnia and her team, as opposed to Ben's policy work, which was directed by the board, because policy is board's work. So does that make sense, Sharon? It's still going to get clunky. I trust Zinnia will be able to figure that out. And so that was my thinking, to try to keep it simple. And also in that sense of trying to create an opportunity in the future that seems like people could navigate and not be expected to be at everything. So.
Yeah, and like I think what we started to unpack a little bit last week was there will be some very specific components that will be addressed per pillar this year, because we are standing up a lot of supports around student voice. So that's going to be a major component. And then also with our family affinity series, part of what we were talking about before that Director Zerschmied had brought up was, how would we utilize those spaces to also support advocacy for our families that have been underrepresented or underserved. And so a coordinated effort to maybe across time and also affinity groups, there might be opportunities to sit in and listen to the concerns or the progress that we're making that can be felt at the local level, and then be brought back to the committee as well. I mean the board as well. And so same thing with our community processes. We're going to have a few opportunities for that, given the work that Director Bowman had brought forth with the bias and hate speech policy. So I felt like that was a natural progression forward, given the different components that we're talking about, and also part of that education component of being anti-racist, anti-bias. It would be nice to have a board member to connect with that work as well, as a way to do a temperature gauge of how we're following through with those commitments.
I think there's going to be a lot of cross-pollination between some of the pillars. And so it might be useful if we've got a different board member on staff, student, families, communities, because it seems like students and families is going to have a lot of crossover. So maybe those 2 board members could use each other as their sounding boards for ideas that have come up in their smaller group to talk to people about. Similarly, I think families and communities could have some cross-pollination. So I don't know if that's possible. Obviously, we can't have a 3-way conversation because that would break public meeting law, but it might be useful to share some information, as well as share it at the full board meeting when we all are together in a public meeting.
So this is, as Todd said, it's going to be messy, it's going to get sticky, and we're going to have multiple crossovers, but I think this is a good way to start. And Jill, I appreciate that. I mean, for me, really trying to reach out, understand the components of creating a more welcoming opportunity for potential board members. I mean, you all know, right? That's really important to me this year. So I'm going to trip over community as you know, and I know that others have an interest. I know that Ben has a strong interest in that as well. So, you know, yeah, it's not going to be perfect by any stretch, but so I guess at this point, I don't know, you guys, if you want to, you know, it sounds kind of like Emily and Rowan kind of already land, you know, in students. You guys have the flexibility, right, to kind of bounce wherever you want and really engage as, you know, you choose. Unfortunately, the rest of us can't do that. So I just will kind of leave it for you guys to kind of, you know, share. What are you thinking? Where's your, I'm sure your heart and your mind are everywhere. Got to put your hands one place. So I'll just leave that up for feedback from board members.
Then yeah, I had a quick question. Do school pillar leaders ever meet as a group across the district?
Yes, they do. Can you be more specific though about, are you saying administrators, teacher leaders, or?
Well, I thought each school had, like as part of the building equity coordinator or the equity team, that that each school had somebody on a pillar. So I was wondering, for instance, if the staff pillar members from all 16 schools ever meet as like a subgroup, or if the student staff pillar.
Yeah, you know, I'm glad that you brought that up because that was the hope. But again, one of the, that's why we advocated for what we advocated for the SIA funds to support collaboration, because the building equity coordinators are, they receive a stipend, but the building equity, I mean, the pillar leaders, they do it voluntarily. And so I would really like to make sure that we fund those opportunities because you know, I think we want to express the value of teachers' time to be able to have them join in for those. So that's why we were advocating for that. So we're just waiting for our SIA budget, and then we can say yes or potentially put on hold for next year. But that's why we advocated for those funds to be able to do just that.
So for example, I just have a question. Since a lot of these would be participating in the groups, and if they are Zoom, and if we are not participating but observing, does that technically violate public meeting law if we're not talking, just listening? Jill, you're raising your no, yes, yes, no.
Yes.
Yes, even if we're just listening, we can't have more than 2 of us unless it's a public meeting.
I think the other thing that's great about this, though, is that a lot of those meetings, because they're not affinity spaces, can be recorded. So you can also watch it afterwards and then be privy to what happened during that time. And then that will serve the same purpose.
Yeah, it's interesting on Zoom because, you know, you don't really, it's kind of like watching a recording, right? Because you can't see anybody. I mean, so it's interesting times, but thank you for that clarification.
So one of the things I'm really trying to focus on whose interests and abilities fall into which pillar. A couple of things that strike me is I know that Ben, you've been really interested in students, and I assume that also expands to community. So I'm guessing you want to go on one of those 2. I'm thinking staff goes with a lot of the BEC work that Karen and I have done. Karen's done more, but also with the curriculum. And so maybe whoever's doing staff should be one of the people who's on the curriculum committee for that cross-pollination. Families could cross-pollinate with early learning. It could also, I mean, it's the whole ball of wax. So anyways, that's just sort of my first thoughts. I don't know if there's other people who are dying for one thing or another, maybe speak up.
Well, Ben just said that he, you know, student peer or pillar, let me get the right P word, is a great fit for him. So if all of you are like, yeah, that makes sense, that's a natural alignment, then, you know, check. Ben heads the student pillar. And so then I think the three of you, Jill, I appreciate the trying to create links. Thank you, Zinnia. But I would just do a shout out where you think your heart is and your mind is and what's a good fit.
Staff, please.
I'm happy with either families or community. I may be leaning a little bit more towards community, but I could be happy with either.
I thought I messaged to everybody. I messaged to Ben. Sorry, Ben. Private message. I just said families or communities.
Okay, you want to do rock, paper, scissors for which one of us is families and which one is community?
You know, okay, so you said you lean more towards communities, Jill?
Yeah, probably a little bit, but
okay. Families are fine with fine with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Maureen, you're gonna hop back and forth as you can and as things pop up. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, I just and I assure you, what I would be, you know, would love to take a pillar. I assume that you are all doing this out of really the desire to participate, right? So I just thought that that was fair to give you all kind of that pillar, and then as it makes sense, and I'll stay in connection with Zinnia to see, you know, what makes sense for me to pop in when I'm not conflicting with two of you already kind of cross-pollinating, if that makes sense. So, yeah, so what I have is Karen for staff, Ben for students, Sharon families, and Jill for community. Does that all? And then I think Emily and Rowan automatically fall on students, but truly, if there's something that comes up that makes sense, I know that Zinnia will be sharing that with you. So, or fellow board members, if you think that's something that one of our student representatives would be good to have their perspective as well, you know, do a reach out to them as well. So
I actually would love to see one of the student reps dip into families and community every now and again, and not just stay in the student pool. I think that could be a really great learning experience for either or both of you. And eventually one day we're going to get a Creekside community person in, right?
Oh, yeah. Jill, I'm glad that you brought that up. So yeah, when school starts back up, we do need to address that. So, okay. So Zinnia, any other feedback, thoughts on this aspect?
No, I just maybe just a quick summary of some things that are coming up for each of the pillars. The major focus, right? So the staff pillar, although we are going to continue to support the work with our building equity coordinators, we're really talking about how do we bring that not only to gaining the expertise of our building equity coordinators and equity leadership team, but how do we make sure that that's part of the school community as well. So that's going to be a major process for that, and know that we are going to be systematizing some of our pilot programs around affinity groups. So as we talk about that, training for staff to be advisors is coming up the next couple of weeks. And then for student pillars, especially with the wonderful work that students have already begun to engage in spring and into summer, we hope that we continue to hold forums and student town halls with some of our new partnerships that we're gaining. And so that's going to be a part of that process as well. And then Sharon, thank you for being a part of the family pillar, because as you know, we actually hired a whole bunch of our culturally responsible liaisons and family partnership advocates. So we are standing up a new system. So having your help would be wonderful to be trauma informed as well as culturally responsive. And then as you know, with the community processes, we have our ongoing SIA, SRO process, as well as, you know, community conversations about equity and transformational equity. So looking forward to the work with all of you.
And then Ben, I would add to that, I mean, the SRO piece clearly has a student aspect, so that's a really nice alignment for you and Jill to kind of continue on that piece in that committee when, you know, that happens. So
definitely.
Sorry, I hit a wrong button. Okay. Well, then I think, Zinnia, thank you for organizing this and allowing all of us to engage in this really critical core work. And then, Zinnia, I'll just, I'll probably stay in communication with you on opportunities for me to, jump in. And on a separate note, kind of jumping back to the committee group, Karen Emerson pointed out that I added Ben to financial oversight, but somehow I didn't add the second, which I thought I had. I can continue in that capacity unless somebody wants to do that, and that puts us all, I think, at 3 committees. So let me know if that's, yeah. So I'll just continue to do that and then add Ben. And then another committee that wasn't listed, I mean, at this point, if negotiations for our licensed staff starts back up, at this point, that is Karen and myself. And so we'll continue in that line as well. So other than that, I think this is a great start, and we're off and rolling, I think. So thank you all very much. And yeah, Zinnia, so I can hand it back, I think, to you. We're a few minutes ahead of schedule, so yay for that. And Dr. Sue, and we can kind of get ready to shift gears.
Okay. Dr. Sue, did you have something to say?
No, I think we're ready to transition, I believe, to John and Tara. Is that correct, Senia?
Yes, that is correct.
Outstanding. Well, let's get to the great work.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tara Cooper of John and Tara. Excited to be here with you today. To start us off, we thought we could use this time today basically to kind of calibrate the work that we're going to be doing this year with the board. And this will be the board's opportunity to learn a little bit more about John and I and our work. And also during our time today, begin to establish kind of what are some of the things that we're hoping to accomplish in our work together this year, and outline some ways to really create an environment that's going to be conducive to deep learning and strategic planning and so forth. If that's where you're going. And so with that, I'll start off with introductions, tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Tara Cooper. I'm originally from California, but I've been in the Portland area for the past 7 years. My career spans in education and higher education, really working in student support. And oftentimes the roles that I was in, even in higher education, were around really helping students and families enroll and matriculate and be successful in navigating the educational system, which of course started in higher ed, in high school, sorry, and even for some families before that, helping them with that process. During my time in Portland, I was actually in the School of Ed, the Portland State School of Ed, where I was working with a program to recruit more diversity in the teacher pipeline. So working with students, classified staff, anyone who was interested in becoming a teacher, particularly populations of color and bilingual individuals. And in that work, I got entrenched heavily in the equity work, recognizing that it wasn't just a lack of prospective teachers, it was also the systems that they were having to navigate and some of the challenges there. And so I became the equity coordinator for the School of Ed. During that time, that's actually when I met John, and the great thing about it was I had been doing sort of equity work and coaching and leading others in equity work all along in different roles without fully recognizing that that's what I was doing. And so I partnered up with John, and that's when I began consulting, and I've been doing that for a couple of years now. I also work at Northwest Regional ESD. I transitioned there, and I am the post-secondary pathways director for our region. And I think what's really important in this work to understand is, with equity consultants, there are a variety of things that we can focus on. But for me, what's most important is institutional and structural change. I don't know, the way that I describe it is, if you've ever been to a training and left and was like, that was great. You know, you had new knowledge, you were inspired, you had new hope. But then you're like, now what? Because in terms of the action plans for bringing those things to fruition and changing practices. Sorry, my dog is competing with me now for airtime. You know, a lot of times people got stuck there. So for me, I want to help folks with this. So now what? How do we strategically and very systematically change what's going on institutionally so that equity and inclusion is a part of everything that we're doing in a very holistic way and not an add-on? So in my consulting, doing that, I've worked with different organizations, and one thing I think that's particularly relevant in this case is in terms of working with the board. I've actually served on a board for a nonprofit in the executive role and just as a board member. I've also had a CEO position where I had to work very closely with the board, so I'm very familiar with some of the dynamics and things, you know, the give and take in that relationship, and the multiple hats you sometimes wear in those roles, especially around an issue such as, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm really excited to be here with you guys and work with you. And with that, I'll pass it on to John so you can learn a little bit about him.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. Did anybody else hear some feedback and some interference when Tara was speaking? I was thinking it might have just been me, but just so you know, there was a little bit of feedback. A little bit about me. I am a straight, cisgender white male who has really focused my whole personal and professional life since high school on issues of equity and social justice and civil rights. So this is the work that I've been doing since I was actually in high school. And so and I'm old, so I have a lot of experience. So that's another part of my identity is that I'm part of the elderly right now, or you could call me an elder and grant me some wisdom, but you know, but I'm in that category as well. But that said, you know, I've worked for the last probably 30, 40 years in Oregon, starting at Oregon State University and their Educational Opportunities Program. But then I made the major shift to the Oregon Department of Education, where I worked for 16 years. And the last several years there, I was the leader of the Access and Equity team. But at that time, it was an uphill battle within the State Department of Education because we didn't have the support and the focus and the priority that the Oregon Department of Education now has on equity. For the last 11 years or so, 11, 12 years, I've been working as a consultant and also part-time faculty at Portland State and Lewis and Clark and University of Oregon, teaching classes there in leadership and social justice and culturally responsive leadership. But during that time, I've had the opportunity to meet with and work closely with several different school boards, and also to consult with the Oregon School Boards Association, actually to help them in adopting an equity policy or a model policy. So I've done a lot of practical work with school boards and work over time in the adoption of equity lens and equity policies, but also some work, and this gets to why I love working with Tara and also why we love working with the Tigard-Tualatin School District, getting into some work that is actually transformational, that changes the culture of a school board, changes the culture of a school district, and actually results in sustainable, systemic, and structural change. And that's hard work because we talk about the work being both personal and professional, systemic and structural, and we talk about the work being inside out work. And so it's our intention, you know, to work closely with you, to grapple with you, to support you, to encourage you to ask difficult questions, to get you to engage in meaningful dialogue with each other, to move towards the change that is so needed for our students, especially students of color, but for for all students, and especially those who've been historically underserved. So again, that's a few words about me, and also how Tara and I work very closely together. For the last couple of years, we've been working with the school district and working with their leadership team, their building equity, coordinators, and so we're pretty grounded in the equity work of Tigard-Tualatin School District. So I'll stop there.
So this is also, I'm going to jump in here and this will be a test. Let me know if you're still hearing feedback from me. But to start off, one of the things that John and I were hopeful for was to just hear from the board. What are some of your hopes for this work? Recognizing these may be first thoughts, or it could be just what you've been thinking about for a while, knowing that this opportunity was coming up. What are you hopeful for? And that's in the broadest sense. It could be something, specifically project-wise or personal growth or your growth as a team. Just where does your mind go?
I can start. I think the thing that has been on my mind a lot is kind of since the conversation around hate speech has begun, there's been for me, and I think others, but for me at least, like there was a recognition that I think took too long to make, but that equity in education isn't just about academic outcomes and graduation rates and test scores, and historically we've talked about educational equity as just meaning race isn't a predictive factor when thinking about student outcomes. But what the students have made super clear is that in our district, yes, progress being made on academic outcomes, but the student perspective is that little progress is being made in terms of lived experience of students in the hallways of our schools, where racial slurs are still a regular occurrence, and where othering still happens all the time because of the race of a student. So I think that's the piece that I am specifically thinking of and interested in, and that's weighing on me a little bit. So I'll just offer that to start.
Well, Ben, thank you. Thanks for being bold and jumping in there. And I think for me, I appreciate Ben starting with that. And I would add kind of I do believe in terms of the SEL work that has been front of mind for a long time. And a lot of those strategies in the classroom haven't been just academic, but there's the disconnect. So for me, it's just kind of that heavy heart that we have been on that path doing this work, but that disconnect exists. So how do we ensure, all individuals on deck on how we move this work together successfully? Because I do believe it's been more than an academic lens, but to really validate and honor the disconnect, as Ben said, in the hallways for our students. So, so that piece is really large for me. And I think, back to what was said last week, what I've heard in other opportunities I've had to speak with equity leaders is, what are we doing to create not just a welcoming space for our students, but a welcoming space for community leaders that could, or community members that could be, our leaders. And so that's another piece, is really what are the pieces that we have to shift for an authentic feeling of, yes, I could do this work. I can be a lead partner for the district. So that's me.
I was, after session last week, I went back and looked at all of the resources that Ronnie had suggested, and I was really appreciated the resources he provided, because many of them were actual examples of what it looks like. So it gave me a vision of, it put theory into practice for me. It's like, okay, this is how it all comes together. And so I guess I'm excited about learning how we do that in our district, put theory into practice, which is hard stuff. Just looking at all the different, and actually Stand and Deliver, I had watched that years ago. I didn't, it was fun to rewatch it again. But hard work, yeah. And so just trying to figure out, you know, where our priorities are as a district in terms of how we're going to go about it, how much, how fast, where we're going to target, all those kind of things. So just a lot of thoughts swirling around after last week.
It's funny that Sharon watched Stand and Deliver, because we just watched it again last night. And I had a really hard time with it because I kept looking and going, how can Edward James Olmos be that young? Just anyway. The thing that's really is sitting with me right now is something that Ronnie said last week, which is don't let anything distract you from the work and keep pushing through it. And I know this year we're going to have a lot of distractions from the work. And so I want to make sure that we stay focused on getting this equity piece pushed forward and getting, as Ben said, more comfort for students walking down the halls, and also the disciplinary data coming back into the lines we want it to be, and the academic data coming into the lines we want it to be. So all of those things together, how do we keep moving all of them in the right direction with all of the distractions we're going to have this year?
The thing that I've been thinking about is getting the board to a point where our dialogue shifts. And the thing that stands out in particular is that we have the equity framework questions in front of us, but I don't feel like we talk about things with those questions or with that language. And it probably is because it's a learned skill that we need to learn, but I'm hoping that we really do, so that we're really using that tool or other tools effectively.
Emily and Rowan. Oh, yeah, you guys go ahead.
For me, I think that throughout this whole quarantine process and with the season of change, I'm really hoping that the equity work is more whole, I guess. So I think previously it's been the work of students of color voicing their opinions, and I think now we're starting to see white allies and people learning about allyship. So I'm hoping that this coming year and in the future that we'll see people voicing up against injustices and small microaggressions more often.
I'm sorry, my internet has been cutting in and out this whole time. What was the original question?
John, you go ahead and address
the original question was hopes. Just going into this, you know, what are some initial things that come to your mind in terms of your hopes for this equity work this year with the board?
Yeah, I probably agree with Emily, and just make sure that at all times we're working together and pushing towards common goals. And, you know, when disagreement is needed, we can have that, but not having anything unnecessary. I think that is one thing I'd look forward to.
Tara and I are taking lots of notes. And I'm not surprised by your hopes, and I am encouraged by your hopes, because I think that you are beginning to describe some of the key elements of the work, some of the challenges of the work, but where this is all headed. I mean, that's, for me, your hopes actually make me hopeful, because I think we're aligned with many of your hopes.
And I actually really appreciate the breadth of what was expressed, you know, different areas, and they all align, and there's a different focus for some of them. And that's really important, because sometimes in this work, it's hard to understand, you know, it feels like a heavy lift. So how do we prioritize and have multiple focuses to make progress? And I think really with the equity and inclusion work, those are skills and strategies that we have to learn, so that we're pulling the multiple levers the entire time. That's how you really begin to see the transformational change. So I'm really excited to hear those things expressed as hopes tonight, and I'm excited for the opportunity for us to work together and figure out some ways, again, to get all those levers going. Because, you know, when you're strategic, intentional, and really coming together as a team, you're able to do it. I've seen it done, so I'm excited.
And a couple of themes that we heard, I just want to highlight. And this is not in any particular order, because this work is not always linear. And so when I think it was Karen was talking about skills, that's about learning skills. We're really committed to skill development and opportunities for practice and to get feedback. I think, Jill, you were talking about, you know, one of the things you heard from Ronnie was just to keep pushing, you know, and to just really being able to actually look at, you know, the hallways and the disciplinary data. And Sharon, you were talking about how it all comes together, putting theory into practice. That's huge. Tara and I have been involved in a lot of workshops where it's about awareness and it's about theory. But then we've also been involved in some school improvement efforts that have been just about practice. Let's just focus on teaching reading. If we just teach reading well, that's going to get us there. And we're really about that intersection of theory and practice. You know, it is about the personal learning. It is about new practices. It's about changing systems and structures. And ultimately, I'm going back to Maureen when you talked about making the district and the buildings welcoming for students, but not just students, all students, but community. And that's actually how you're going to be able to recruit, you know, new board members and recruit members of color for leadership roles in the district and to serve on the school board. And then kind of back to Emily and Rowan a little bit. Emily, Tara and I so strongly agree. This is not the work that needs to land on the shoulders of students of color, families of color, staff of color, leaders of color. White people do need to step up, and that's part of why I'm feeling hopeful about this work. And then Rowan, just this whole notion of disagreement. We can disagree with each other, and Tara and I say we need to learn how to interrupt patterns of thinking, interrupt systems, disagree with each other, engage, we change the discourse so that we can actually get to some of these hopes that you have that will show up in the lives of students, you know, and families, but in the hallways, you know, and kind of going all the way back to Ben, you know, in terms of the hate speech or even the othering or the excluding, the exclusionary practices, the way students and families don't feel like they belong. And it's not about just feeling welcome. It's that they feel like they belong and they have something to contribute. And when they're not there, they're missed and they're valuable and they're cultural assets and everything they bring. So you all just got me excited. I had to go off on that.
I'm muted again. John, do you want to take us into our next question? We had originally hoped to do breakout rooms, but with the webinar format, we're not able to do that. So we had to change it up a little bit. And so now kind of taking those hopes a little further and even what you're hearing from each other, we'll give a little bit of time, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, just for you to think about. And if you're, you know, a journaler, you want to jot some ideas down, what will it take to do this work?
Well, what needs to change? What will it take? And we're talking more about what will it take for you as a school board. I mean, yes, what will it take for the district leaders and for the teachers and students and community, but for you as a school board, what will it take? What do you need? What needs to change?
Well, I guess I want to say kind of what Karen said, that we need to be, we have the equity lens, you know, on our, well, we used to, we don't have it anymore in front of us. Maybe that's the problem, Karen. Just thinking about this work and everything we do. I have a couple of notes as I was going through some of the resources that were provided us last week. I really like pairing the assets, the trauma-informed work, which is assets-based resilience, with the work we're doing ahead, and not viewing marginalized students as victims, but recognizing the assets, the strengths that they bring in to the school. And the other thing I wrote down, I was listening to, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Dr. Cherokee Hawley. He was talking about validate, affirm, build, and bridge. And what he was saying is, he was talking about how getting very specific about who your historically underserved students are, down to even like the country. So we talk about Latinx, are we talking about Guatemala? Are we talking about, you know, Venezuela? Are we talking about Mexico? Because he was saying that you can get really specific, because you'll find that there is a pattern. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because we don't know if we've done that. So I don't know if there's more specificity, but when we talk about who they are, I think we all need to agree who we're talking about. And so I think there's some fine tuning we can do as a board on what we're trying to achieve, so that we can then determine how we're doing. I don't know, I'm kind of rambling, but those are my thoughts.
That makes me think about our need for our equity policy, because I'm thinking that part of that policy might be some definitions, and the focus that, like Director Bowman was just mentioning, that educational equity has been defined this way in the recent past, and that maybe it needs to be viewed or defined more broadly or differently. And I just feel like having that, getting through that and having it in writing would get us all on the same page, and again with similar language.
Well, I guess to tag with Karen, you know, to Ben's work with Abdi and the committee, I mean, I'm excited about the EASH plans, and that speaks to specificity in terms of what is happening exactly in our schools. How are we going to define that? How do we know? And what are we looking for? And to incorporate that into our SIP plan. So it's just that kind of marrying, right, of academic hopes along with how we're taking care of this. And I think to just get clarity, back to Sharon's point, what specifically are we trying to address and improve and create that experience for students? So, and to create that community, back to creating a welcoming, to have that team really feel honored and you are helping lead our thinking, I think really matters. So that is a piece that I'm looking forward to digging in deeper. And then I think the other piece for me is, it's that back to learning, you know, what is every school in our district doing to welcome their families? And, you know, I know that that's beyond a cultural night, but what are how are their websites set up? How do they orient? How do they bring people in to try to learn from that? And because I think those are the first steps that create community members having a sense of a welcoming environment to then step bigger into district work.
The two things coming to mind for me in terms of what do we need, what needs to change is, one, I think we need among the board an alignment in our understanding of the challenges and an alignment in our understanding of what the solutions are, or what the path forward is, at least broadly. And then with that, I think as a corollary is, I think we need a comfortability or willingness to disrupt the status quo at a faster pace than maybe historically has been comfortable, and a plan for handling that backlash that comes with disrupting any status quo for any reason. So those are the two that are coming to mind for me.
And my two are the EASH plan and the EASH oversight committee. I think that's something that's got to get moving, and that will help the board make the changes that it needs to make. Piggybacking on what Director Bowman was just saying, that idea of what needs to change and be ready to change it, and that means support our superintendent who's making changes and be ready for the backlash. And I go back to what Ronnie was talking about staffing, and how do we make sure we've got students that can look and see teachers who look like them. And so that's going to be a pretty big lift for our HR department to be successful in hiring teachers and staff who look like our students more, and we can keep them. That retention piece is a big piece, and the process of doing that could be disruptive to the status quo, as Director Bowman mentioned. And so we as board members need to be ready to say, yeah, it could get uncomfortable, and here's why we're doing it, and we're going to keep pushing through it. So those are my two.
Go for it, Emily. You look like you're ready.
I think I agree with a lot of what Director Bowman says, but it's also about communicating to our students, our community, that the decisions we make have an equitable, or they are intended to be equitable, and explaining that, so that if or when we make those decisions that are disruptive to the status quo, that our communities are welcoming to those decisions, and and communities of color don't feel a backlash to those decisions. I hope that makes sense.
And just what I would add too, going back to what Ronnie said last time about having measurements and making sure that we're on par with where we wanted to be with equity work, I think that's a big thing that we need to make sure we keep up with. And then just getting feedback and listening to our communities and our students, as we have been recently a lot, which I think is great, and continuing to do so.
I don't know if this is your process or protocol, but I'm thinking it would be helpful to just have some of the district leaders reflect on what you heard from the school board members, because Tara and I are taking this in, but you are, not only are you taking it in, but you're also leading this work within the school district as well. And so any perspectives or takeaways or insights from listening to the school board members?
So team, why don't you go ahead, and whatever's left, I'll circle back.
I have a few things to connect with. I really appreciate that the comments that were made around the theme of backlash, right? And I think that's important, because what we when I think about like how this work is going to change, and even what Rowan said around like measurements. I think backlash is kind of a point of measure as well, because as you receive some backlash, I think that means that you're disrupting how or what is perceived comfortable, normal, or how we've done things. And I think those are important things to recognize, as it doesn't feel good to get backlash, but you know that you're heading towards a process of disrupting. The process of backlash also, just from whom are we getting backlash from, and for what is also important. So that's what's coming up for me. And I think something that Director Fox said that was interesting and for me made a connection is, you know, I don't think we have to look so far outside of our own backyard to see some amazing theory to practice bridges. I feel like there are a lot of talent and a lot of people within our district that have actually been doing a lot of that work, just not in a connected way. And so I hope that we can do some of that work to go and explore and see our current school setting, to see some of that brilliance and amplify that up and out for our community to see.
I guess I'll go next.
You go, Dr. McCall.
Hi. So the moment I became a part of our TTSD family, and I was invited to the board retreat last year, gave me, I was inspired that this board was thinking about the work that is before us all, even before the pandemic, and I would say a more interest in the work around equity, is that the commitment that it made me feel that we can do this work with your backing and support. And even now, as I hear you're reflecting on the things that you're committed to, it gives me even more hope that that you're going to be leaders in this work. And Sharon, what you said about recognizing folks from a strength-based, people that, you know, think about the strengths that they have. And we have a lot of that in TTSD. And so it's nice to hear that. And then Ben, you talked about timeline, even though if we push the timeline, we shouldn't be afraid to do that, because this work, the urgency is now. Our kids can't afford multiple years of the system failing them. And I say that because as my youngest graduated from high school, living with the fact that the system has failed a lot of our kids and our kids of color. And I really like hearing that this work is urgent, and we need to, you talked about being disruptors. So disruptors in my mind is doing things when it's not always popular to do, but it's necessary. And it's like the late John Lewis says, good trouble. And so I'm hearing a lot of good trouble talk. And so that fills my cup. And for just the students to just your commitment of being on this board, and we get to hear some of your lived experience and your those experience of your peers. So that's what I've been thinking about as I'm practicing the art community and listening to learn something new. So thank you.
I was just in another meeting coming into this meeting with our culturally responsive communication team, and one of our members made a comment about the loudest voices and the voices that we're hearing from right now, and how they don't necessarily represent the students that we need to be in front of and be supporting the most right now, right? So what I was really struck with was Director Bowman when you talked about alignment. And just knowing that for all of you and in your comments, coming together and making decisions based on priority and being aligned in those decisions, which, you know, made me reflect back on the art of community and your commitment to that. It gets me excited, not only selfishly from the communication person who, you know, next to Dr. Sue hears from these people all the time, but also helping our very vocal community understand that you are aligned and confident in the decisions that you're making on in our commitment to this work.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on what Tracy just said. I think alignment, commitment, those are things that I've heard, and I just think about the importance of us as a K-12 system within our learning community, how important it is to have from district leadership to school leadership to our instructors, our teachers, certified, classified. I mean, and our school board. I mean, it is vital that in doing this work, we do it together, and collectively we stand up for what's right, and we do that together. You know, in listening to the voices that don't meet with who we are, and being able to collectively then not only have the conversations, but also move on policy and commitment, if you will, and action to continue down the path that we need to move down to make our learning community, our larger community, what it needs to be. And so I think just hearing everybody's commitment as a school board is vital and appreciated, and it's another piece to the puzzle for us to do this work together and do it collectively. So I appreciate that.
Hi, everybody. I'm reflecting a lot on my time at Tualatin as a principal, and Rowan and Emily and Zinnia were all there with me. Maureen was there a little bit, and you know, we made some moves that were disruptive. I don't know if Emily and Rowan knew that at the time, but probably the most impactful thing that we did and that I learned from that experience and learned from Zinnia was our affinity groups and giving students a voice. And so that sticks with me. And Zinnia has also taught me so many things about building capacity. You don't have to have the expert come in from the outside. We have experts in our students and our families and our staff. Building capacity, being persistent. So a lot of what you said about measurement, what are we using to measure? Are we using perception data? Are we using how many times we have backlash? Are we using our discipline data? Just keeping it in the focused. So the affinity groups, and then what I'm really resonating with and listening to you talk about is families. And this feels like a time that is our families and our partnership with families are so important during this comprehensive distance learning. And so I feel like this is a pivotal, a moment in time that we can really shift the way we partner and engage with families. So a lot of what you said about how do families experience our schools, it really resonates with me right now.
The word that struck me was the word backlash that Jill used. And it's great to hear that members of the board are supporting leadership in doing this work. She mentioned Dr. Sue being the recipient, but I'm sure, like Tracy said, there's others out there that are getting the feedback from the community. And I think it's important that the rest of the colleagues, including myself, are there to support them, even if it means to listen and support everyone as a group to do the work. and regardless of what the negative feedback coming from the community is.
Patty, did you want to weigh in, or are you still roughing from the side? You're still roughing from the side. Okay. So I would offer in sort of closing or bringing this around relative to district leadership that I too appreciate, and that has been one of the reasons why I have enjoyed the work that I've done here so far in Tigard-Tualatin is the desire of a board to align. But I think it is our opportunity now to align even more deeply around truly these formative pieces of what does it mean to act in ways that disrupt injustice? What does it mean, and what speed with which we do that? The awareness of backlash. I think the board knows that on an issue that I quite frankly find to be far more minor than the work that is being proposed here that occurred over the weekend. In one of the emails that I received, the person was direct with me in the face and in the fact of saying, I don't care about equity work. You will regret doing equity work, and I will make my voice, and we will make our voice known. And so that backlash is deep, that backlash is active, and it is not for the faint of heart that we make that commitment. But what I appreciate is your willingness to do that, because I know that you mean that. And I think at the same time, it is important for all of us, and certainly on our side with the district, to be that warm demander with our white staff and community, to be those allies, to step into this space, even though it may be imperfect, and support the work that needs to be done, so that voices such as that one of which was many, are not the dominant voice. That we are able to push through that, to use Ronnie's term. And that's what I'm committed to doing with all of you, have been committed, continue to be committed, and look forward to supporting that work.
Thank you, Evan. I really appreciate those comments and just the thoughtfulness of this all. And I just want to say, for me, and I know this is true for John as well, you know, in our roles, we're here to facilitate conversation, but in a way, we're also participants and learners too. And so I definitely appreciate hearing from all of you. And I also just want to call out, because this really resonated with me. Emily, I heard you saying communicate why decisions are made and kind of protect the communities of color so they're not disproportionately impacted. And that really sat with me, because I think about like how from a leadership perspective, we can make decisions, we can implement them, we can plan for unintended consequences and so forth. But at the end of the day, we cannot always be in the classrooms and in the hallways with students of color or students who may be disproportionately impacted by that backlash. And I'm just really grateful that Emily and Rowan are a part of this process, and also that TTSD takes the steps that you do to incorporate student and family voice, because in order for this work to really be successful and for us all to be able to learn as a community, we need as many of those voices and perspectives, because we can't be everywhere and hear everything and know everything. So I appreciate the openness, because that's what makes a difference in this work. I have one other part to this, and I'm not going to ask you to share out. If you want to share out, you can, but you certainly don't have to. In terms of, you know, what you think it'll take for this work to happen, and from what you've heard from each other, I would like for everyone to just take a moment to go very deep and personal and ask that question of yourself. in terms of your learning, in terms of, taking those steps to disrupt when it's hard and the backlash is great. In this process, if there were just one or two things that you could focus on for yourself, even if you never even shared it with the group that that's what you're focusing on, but it's something that you need to work on, what is that? Or what are those couple of things? And again, you don't have to share out. We're just going to give a couple minutes just for folks to reflect. And this is for everyone, not just the board member, all of us on this call. Okay. I just added the question, or a version of the question, to the chat if you want to look it over and think about it, because hopefully throughout our time together, that's something that we can continue to revisit and really be thinking about. And we're doing this work as a group, but we also know that the work also has to happen on a more personal level. And so in this work, John and I are available to you for that as well. So whereas, there may not be things that you want to bring up in the whole group, there's opportunities for one-on-one or smaller sessions to hash those things out and talk about them a bit more. So before I move on to the next question, because I said you don't have to share out and you don't, but is there anything anyone would like to share or that brings up? There's definitely space for that.
Tara, I'll share. I think we all are recognizing the weight, of really putting these words into action. And I think about what is it that we can do really well on top of a COVID world, right? So as we create frameworks for hallway conversations, but Emily, Rowan, Ben, I know you're engaged with a ton of students. So how does that look when we're not walking down the hallways, but I know that still exists? How do we ensure we're wrapping around our families with the greatest of needs, right? In a distance world. And that just weighs really, really heavily on me, on doing this work as a heavy lift and doing it well and setting it up well in a COVID environment. So.
That's almost exactly what I was thinking. Is I know because of my medical conditions that I am locked down as tight as anybody these days. And so my ability to get out into the community and to interact at schools in any way, I'm going to be the last person to do it. And so how can I be a part of that community when I'm seeing everybody through a screen, and how do I make that happen? Also knowing that Zoom conversations tend to be fraught with the possibility of misunderstanding. You can't see body language as well. Intonation is not quite right. And so how do I do all of that with this added layer of the difficulties and the complexities of communication over the internet?
I think I'm gonna use one of our protocols, the zones of comfort. I feel like I'm skirting the risk zone and a little bit of the danger zone a little bit, just because I feel like I'm I think going back along the lines of what Director Zerschmied said, just I hope this doesn't, I hope that this doesn't get misunderstood, but I am assuming that it will be. But I think for me as a staff of color, and now as a leader of color in our school district, I have to for that personal work is how can I am optimistic, but I'm also guarded because I've had so many years of conditioned and imprints of hurt in spaces, in organizations, that sometimes even the positive imprints are not strong enough to make those previous hurts not present. And I think sometimes that vulnerability, and also to be able to connect not only with the head component of it, but also the heart and the soul and the moral imperative and all those things that I feel like as a staff of color or as a leader of color, that I feel like I have to hold that burden, because I also want to make sure that our students and families and staff are protected. But I know that I can't do that. So that's how do I reconcile that? And I think walking into that vulnerability is asking people to do what is counterintuitive in a system that has not really held space for that. So I just wanted to offer that that thought.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because what it makes me think of is what I've seen in this work, both as a participant and a facilitator. The conditions have been set because that vulnerability is not a part of the day-to-day norm, and space isn't created for that. In the moments when folks are doing that for the sake of the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation that they're having, oftentimes the burden falls on folks of color or the minoritized groups within the room. And sometimes with good intentions, giving them space to be heard and so forth. But then they are the ones who do that emotional labor and deal with the risk that comes with that vulnerability, or the disappointment, blame, and shame that could come with not showing up when you had the opportunity to show up. You know, it's multi-layered. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, Zinnia, because that's one of those norms, one of those conditions that we're all going to have to work very hard to disrupt, to show up in this work. And, you know, just recognizing that for some, those emotionals and social barriers are going to be even greater because you aren't expected to show up in that way oftentimes. But this work requires it if we want to do it well, and we want to support each other as a team. Excuse me, as a team. Are there any other thoughts or comments before we go to the next question that we have for you? We have lots of questions for you today. They're good questions though, right? All right, so the next question, and I have to read this one, forgive me, but actually we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want you to think about this more on a practical level. And this is just our first pass at it. So if everything doesn't come out now and you need to reflect on it, it's fine. But this is to help John and I understand a little bit more and create a process that's going to be really effective for you. As we talk about doing this work, talk about what it's going to take, how do we do it together in a way that honors and builds trust, effective communication, and synergy among board members? Like, for example, what kind of agreements might we, excuse me, might we need? Protocols, framework, maybe even some specific knowledge or areas of awareness, increasing our awareness in. Are there any sort of specific skills? What will it take to work together in a way that honors and builds trust, effective communication, and synergy to do this work?
Tara, when you open that up, it makes me think of how do we build a strong foundation? Or strengthen the foundation, because the work doesn't get easier.
I think that it's more of a challenge with, as Jill had said, with Zoom and virtual meetings, because I feel like in a lot of ways, relationship building has kind of ground to like a snail's pace because you just don't have those opportunities for, you know, chats about, hey, side conversations about, oh, how's it going? Just relationship building, and then also being able to talk with district staff informally about different things. Teachers, you know, when we go to different meetings, connecting, and I really crave that. And so I think it's in this environment in which we're operating, I'm finding it really hard to overcome those technological barriers or to deal with these things through technology, because they just aren't the same.
We used to practice relationship before task. That was our thing a couple of years ago, and that's exactly what I think Sharon is referring to. It's you need to be friends, or at least friendly, in order to have that level of trust to have the really hard conversations. And fortunately, we had a couple of months to build that before, you know, as a board, before we all got locked down. But it's going to take some care to maintain if we don't get to see each other in person for the better part of a year or whatever it's going to be.
I think for me, it's, you know, Zinnia, I will never assume what your lived experience is, right? Having said that, the word vulnerability and how, you know, it's linked to courage, and that's kind of foundational in, you know, Brene Brown's work. I guess for me, that trust in building a foundation that if I'm vulnerable and I show ignorance or ask something that's viewed as a stupid question or an understanding, that we're given grace to be that person that's trying to work towards the right thing, but might stumble and fall. But the intention is there to work towards the right answers. And again, Zoom and doing this work in this fashion is not easy. So where my vulnerability, Zinnia, is very different than yours. It's that knowing that as a board leader, to be heading down the right way, knowing I'm going to make mistakes, but understanding that people know the intention is headed in the right direction. So.
I agree with a lot of what has been said. The piece that I would add that's maybe more of a technical piece is vocabulary in terms of effective communication. And like, I think, it's just, this is a very charged, emotionally charged topic for a lot of folks. And sometimes an improper usage of a word or a phrase or lack of knowledge about the historical context of a phrase can really, I mean, we saw it at OSBA, frankly, in a couple cases, and it just exploded the whole thing. So I think that brings a sensitivity to the communication, that the more that we have like a shared understanding of vocabulary and the willingness to give each other grace as we're navigating new territory for some, I think could be really helpful.
I'm picturing in my mind where I've seen like a list, I guess, of agreements that people have amongst the group. And I know that one that I see all the time is assume good intention. And so maybe I'm jumping ahead to what that list of agreements looks like, but that just keeps coming up in my head of like as number one, because that, if we are all assuming that of one another, then I think that does help us be able to be more vulnerable. But I'm sure there's some others too that just aren't quite formed into phrases for me yet. But that one definitely seems like the most important to me.
I think for me, it would be that knowing when I share my lived experiences or the lived experiences of someone I am close to, that I am heard and that the things that I'm saying are absorbed by other board members, and the knowledge and trust that they will take it into consideration when we are making decisions.
Yeah, I would add, just similar to what Karen said about always having an open mind, and whenever we discuss anything, even if you have like initial reactions, just introspection and thinking about why we think about certain things, why we have certain reactions, and reflecting upon what those mean for us, and if, but yeah, just having an open mind about everything.
Rowan, I really appreciate that. And Emily, I really appreciate your insights too. I think something, going back to this question of what will it take to do this work together in a way that honors and builds trust, effective communication, and synergy among board members. And I think that something that is coming up for me is, and I offer this, with the art of community or lived experiences, being being a culture of care, but also recognizing we need each other's help to be thoughtful, but also to be better listeners and support that idea of curiosity. And and this is from my lived experience around this idea of assuming good intent. I think it goes back to it's difficult sometimes because I feel like I've had so many imprints of like me assuming good intent, but then behaviors continue to show that it's almost like a disclaimer that you know what we can't really manage how people absorb what we say, and I think that needs to be okay in that mess, because sometimes it takes time to calibrate what is understood to be impact and also intent. So I bring that up because I feel like, you know, oftentimes it's the folks who are often underserved or underrepresented or don't typically have their voice heard, where they have to assume good intent. And I just want to make sure that, like, who are we asking that grace from? And I just wanted to offer that in this space, but also, you know, share that this work, the foundational component and what builds trust, it can't be expected overnight. It needs to be calibrated over time. And so I just wanted to offer that too, that it might feel or people might absorb what is stated in a way that you can't control, but that's part of that process too. That's part of that messiness. That's part of what it means to be curious about each other, ask questions, and so forth. So I just wanted to offer that into the space.
Can I just add something to that? Because this is actually like, we're doing the work right now. And this is the part of the process. And when I was writing my notes, you know, I wrote down assume good intentions. And then I wrote a question. What does that look like for you? Part of this process and getting to that place of building trust with each other and even trust within ourselves, because sometimes it's our own self-doubt and insecurities that show up and derail moments. So it's trusting ourselves and trusting each other. We've got to understand some things. And I think at the heart of assume good intentions, in that moment where things are going sideways and you're saying, whoa, I meant well, I get the impact was different from how I intended. But what is it that you're needing in that moment? Because like what Xenia was saying with that specific example, for folks of color, sometimes the assume good intentions lands on us differently because we're tasked differently in that transaction. So if you don't get a calm, okay, I assume you meant well, but you get another reaction that's based on the impact of whatever's been said or done, what do you need in that moment? Because it likely won't feel good. What do you need to know so that you can stay in there, stay in the conversation? And even if there's a cooling off period, what's going to make you come back to the conversation? Because in this work, we cannot rely on the other person to say and do things that make us feel better and keep us at the table. We have to know for ourselves, what do we need to be able to keep coming back to the table, even when it doesn't feel good. What else? Anything else coming up for folks to add to our list? That's going to continue to grow. This is just the start of the list.
I'm just going to add on to what Tara said in response to what Zinnia said, and around the theme of assuming good intentions, which I think is necessary, and that we're all learning and unlearning together. I mean, that's foundational for this. I think there's a skill involved in this that we can, you know, communicate with you all, and that we can practice. Getting back to Tara's question, how do we stay in the conversation when it doesn't feel good? How do I, as a white person, you know, respond when perhaps a person of color is frustrated or angry with me because I said something that was hurtful? Even though I had positive intention, I can't expect them to automatically just give me grace in that moment. So how do I have a skill set to really listen to impact before I go to that space of I had good intentions? So how do I navigate that? And there's some practice and there's some skills there that I think will help all of us to get to that place. And we are going to make mistakes, and because we're learning and we're unlearning and we're breaking patterns, so I think it's just really complex, and there's a lot of paradoxes and a lot of dilemmas in this, and it's slowing down to listen, you know, for the impact, and to listen to how we all are engaging. And I'm going back to something that Rowan said, you know, is that, you know, we have to understand reactions and slow down there and do that difficult work, because our reactions are based in, you know, patterns of thinking and patterns that have not benefited, you know, minoritized students in particular. So I'm just thinking there's some work there that we can do, and we can strengthen, you know, our skills and strengthen our commitment. And when we move into conflict and we slow down and we come through it together, that just so strengthens the relationship and strengthens the community, heals our hearts, and say, I'm going to come back because there's something positive that's really coming from this. This is amazing, and I want to come back and keep doing this.
And a part of me wonders if in what I said at all landed on the fact that I was able to lean into that vulnerability, the fact that I was able to offer my perspective, which I really don't think I would in a lot of different settings, but because of my relationship with Karen, because of my relationship with folks in this space, I felt that truth, that gift of actual engagement and connection can be felt through just another perspective. And my wondering is, in alignment to that skill set, are we able to listen through our own feelings to hear truth from others as they share it, and see those opportunities as gifts, even though it doesn't feel like a gift in the moment?
One of my hopes for doing this work and us coming together as a team, there are some specific things that we're going to identify that we want to work towards and accomplish. And as a board, there are most definitely going to be some specific things that you want to work on. But, you know, speaking of that gift, when you invest the time, when you invest the resources to bring in, you know, consultants and do this work in a very targeted way, you create an opportunity. And I know that a goal for me and John when we do this is to create a space where you will see this as your opportunity. Like, hopefully this team can build enough trust around one another to commit to the process, to let this be that place where, like Zinnia just demonstrated, you share that vulnerability or that thought that you might not otherwise share, so that as a team, you can hear different perspectives and you can practice working through it. You can practice building trust and community to know that even if all hell breaks loose, you can still come back together and move forward. The only way you grow in your confidence that that can happen is when you do it and see it happen. And that could be a space where we practice and allow that type of work to be a part of the more practical aspects of our work and time together. So anything else for now to add to the list? Because again, this is ongoing conversation, so this isn't the end, but just some things to think about as we start out. Okay, well, we got a few more minutes, and so for the last 10 minutes, what we wanted to do was kind of think about what some of the priorities, focus, and goals for our time together will be. Some of our next steps include John and I would like to meet with each board member individually, kind of just to do like an informational interview, if you will, a chance for us to get to know each other better. And then from there, we can begin scheduling some time together to work on those things that you all highlight as the priorities and goals for this work. So what are some of the things that you're seeing as priorities for the start of this work?
And some of these have emerged, but now, this is a time to just, really hone in.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things I'm wondering is, as we're thinking about goals, is what constitutes aspirational and the pie in the sky that we'd like to get to, and then what are the chunks, what are the steps along the way to get there? Can we, is it really functional to shoot aspirational the first day out of the gate? How do we break it up into pieces? But I think having that aspirational goal as part of our process is important so that we know where our true north is.
Yeah, I would agree. Just some of my first thoughts about that is I like, if the aspirational is what's on your mind, then yeah, let's put it on the list, because part of our time together will be about chunking it down. Okay, how do we get closer to that aspiration? What are those pieces? And I recognize that sometimes folks, you may not know what those pieces are. You just know that's where you're trying to get. And so if that's what you got, let's put it on the list. And others may have some very specific pieces that you see as a goal or a priority. So for now, let's get it all out and start there.
Yes, I'll go next. And I'm not going to be very articulate about it. I mean, for me, and maybe how my brain functions, it is more that, so what is it specifically, right? To Ben's point about being a disruptor, right? So, what is it that we really, is it around hate speech? Is it around, if it's microaggressions in a classroom, that you're connecting with all your students and making them feel welcomed and engaged in work? Is that something we want to understand and measure? And so I don't want to miss steps because I'm trying to jump to, what is it that's the outcome that we want to see? And so that this can be a struggle for me, right? Tara, where's my appropriate landing space? Because I do want to see that where's the high goal, but let's get to something clear and measurable. And you guys in a little bit will talk about, this is timely, right? We're going to talk about our board goals, and do they need to look very different in how we reflect on this work, as well as our operating agreements. But anyway, that will follow John and Tara, but yet it might be the right year to kind of just really do a reset. So anyway, that's it for now. Ben, Karen, Sharon, I'm sure you guys have great additions.
I'm just going to talk. I don't really have my thoughts well put together, but we're a big organization, and when I was working at Kaiser, I always used to liken it to an aircraft carrier, and to turn the ship, it's like versus a little boat where it can turn on a dime. And one thing that I learned at Kaiser, and I see happening here, is I love the because it can feel very top down, like you got to do this, but I love the top down, bottom up approach. In other words, I love the Plan, Do, Study, Act, and the ability for teachers and staff to innovate about how to do something, how to implement it, and learn from that effective ways to do it from each other through Plan, Do, Study, Act. But what I struggle with is, as a board, it's kind of that top down. Then what do they need from the board? What do they need from the district to enable them to do that? But we also have to be really focused and clear on what we're trying to ask them to, or what we're asking them to accomplish. So, I guess for me, the questions are: do we need to change course? Are we doing, do we need to move faster? Is it the pace, or is it the things we're doing aren't right? So I just have a lot more questions in my mind than I do answers, but yeah, so that's why I said it's not very articulate. I'm kind of rambling, but those are my thoughts.
So I'm just going to throw this out here for the elephant in the room. I've found, particularly in this work, some of the greatest brainstorming or idea spawning comes from inarticulate comments. Like, it's okay if it's not all together. And something else too, sometimes what causes us to respond, or in a moment of vulnerability, or you're figuring it out, you don't have all the right language. That is the nature sometimes of that moment, and it's okay. So I say that to say, as educators, as really accomplished professionals, this is a space where you don't have to have it all together. Just put it out there and let's figure it out and muddle through it.
I apologize if my video is not coming through. Your faces are frozen on my computer, but I'm just going to talk anyway. I think for me, some sort of game plan for the year that's like aligned with this work and aligned with specific outcomes that we're looking for. And I kind of like how Jill framed it, where you've got academic outcomes, you've got discipline outcomes, you've got sort of lived experience, social emotional outcomes. And like, that's more of a district level plan, I think, than a board level plan. But perhaps engage with the EASH plans really glad you just gave that talk about inarticulate thoughts being helpful, because I'm clearly contributing. So I think a game plan and yeah, just like some methodology for us as a board to not let things fall through the cracks, not let this work become something that, you know, we just some way to integrate it into our work that guarantees that it is top of mind as we are meeting and considering things.
I can't get past the board role part because I feel like I'm hearing a lot of what the district would be doing. So my mind is wondering, how will we know if things are successful? And maybe that's what Maureen was asking about, what the what are we measuring? But it does seem like the reports or the data requests need will be different than they have been up to now. Because I know that we've talked about wow, both yeah, what are the questions we need to ask to be able to get the answers we need to know if we're being successful?
Rowan, Emily, you guys jump in.
I was going to say, it seems like, Karen, what you were just talking about falls more into how we should rework our strategic plan. What are we going to look for? What are we going to measure? We, the district, you, Dr. Ricky Smith. What are we, the board, going to ask the district to look at, to measure, to evaluate? And then there's the second component, which is what do we as a board need to do to work to get our working mojo going? I think it seems like there's two questions there.
Well, I think it is a goal of ours that we do revisit the strategic plan. So I don't know if I differentiate those two, but maybe it's that, yes, we need a priority is to revisit the strategic plan, and a priority is how do we do that? Okay.
I think that's exactly it.
I think there are so many aspects to the work that we're doing that the board is doing right now that it's still hard for me to wrap my head around exactly what steps I want to take or I would like to see the board take specifically. But I'm excited to do the work.
Yeah, similarly, I'm not entirely sure either, and having it be my first time and only time in this position, there's not much I can improve on from before, but I guess just the next steps would be doing our best, at least me and Emily's doing our best to have outreach to students and being able to connect with students during quarantine and figure out good ways that we can do that online, or socially distanced if we can do that too.
Well, I have no doubt you guys are great thinkers and that you're doing this for to really move the dial for student experience and for culture in our schools. So I'm grateful for that. And right now, I think we're all kind of struggling what this is going to be. So I think we're kind of all at the same starting point. I mean, you know, Jill, you bring up the strategic plan, but you know, as Zinnia, you know, when we started on this equity path a couple years ago, and I kind of just went, I don't want to lose some real specificity in this work right now. We're in the last year of the strategic plan. That was pre-COVID, I think, going to be the work this summer, right? Is to really take in all the SSA work. And because we had this conversation last summer as we started to head down the path for SSA. Like, nope, we don't know it aligns right. And so this, sometimes I just want to, this work is not simple, but break it down so it's really focused and that we stay on a track. And if we try to grab the strategic plan, because I also believe deeply that the strategic plan is a full process, right? If we're going to do a reset, and maybe that's where the equity pillars and all that piece comes together. But I just want to throw that out there as a little bit of a, let's stay really focused on this, which is absolutely strategic, but not get lost in the big process, if that makes sense. So.
And Maureen, what I would offer relative to that, relative to the reboot of the strategic plan and the way in which we think about assessments, I have had a plan to bring that forward relative to how we are going to measure student growth and success in the current CDL environment that probably will extend itself beyond the 9-week, depending on how metrics run, or wax and wane, as it were. But I would offer thinking about my own lived experiences in terms of school improvement and turnaround, is that the actual foundation is relative to equity. And closing the equity of opportunity gap. And then the other pieces that are within the strategic plan, how we staff, how we build culture, how we think about student instruction, builds off of that. But if you don't have a firm foundation around what you really mean by equity and what that walk is going to be and what the expectations for those who engage with us, with their students and families. The rest really is technical in nature, but will not produce if you don't have a clear foundation relative to what we believe equity is. And so if we did nothing as a board and district together, but really dig into that and redefine that and what the measures around that are, I think that would be a very strong and formative piece of work for everything else that comes behind it or comes after it.
Well, if we as a group, I mean, because the cornerstones are rock solid, not trying to play on a pun there, right? But if it's based on equity and then talent, right? And culture and then instruction, and we agree on one critical component in all those and stay focused on that, and then build from there, I am good with that. And I think my hesitation was the 5 or 20 page plan that we have, that I just don't, I just really, I get stuck there, right? Give me things, even when what I loved about the East is I had this vision, right, of just something direct and measurable and clear. And so, Sue, I appreciate that. And I think that's spot on. And then if it's a commitment to all of us to just, what are those one things in the cornerstones, and equity shifts maybe to the foundation of everything that we're doing. And we've had that conversation multiple times, right? That we felt equity needed to be a cornerstone, knowing that it had to be integrated throughout. But anyway, so maybe Tara and John, we're getting back to what are those goals, but are they grounded in the work that sets the strategic plan?
And the only other piece that I would add to this, Maureen, is that if not now, then when? you know, we you know, I'll grant you COVID is a bugger. These are less than ideal conditions to be doing any kind of work in, let alone this. But what it has done for us, the one gift that has come out of this whole situation is the way it has stripped everything bare. And no one, regardless of how they might, you know, how they might have a perspective, can honestly say if they are thoughtful for the moment and really take a hard look, can say that there isn't injustice. Right? You may have a perspective about that. You may call it fake news. You may say it is your problem, or like that email that I referenced to you earlier on about you will regret doing this, because people are coming from a position of fear. But if not now, then when? And I always ask myself the question as I lead: if I don't do this, that's the more important question rather than if I do this. If I don't do this, what happens? Who's impacted? Who doesn't thrive? Who doesn't succeed? Versus if I do this. Because if I do this, I've got some feedback. I can adjust. But if I can't answer the question, if I don't do this, what happens? So again, I ask the question, if we don't do this, then what?
And I agree. And I think when I don't want us to get lost. So what are those immediate, short-term, mid-range, long-term goals for the year? And I just don't want to get lost in a 20-page document. And I wholeheartedly dove into the last one, right? So that was probably Jill and I, and a process that was months of a community engagement. So that's where I'm trying to get to. I am not discounting or tossing, oh, we don't care about strategic plans. They're just, something you shove up on the wall. That's not at all what I meant. But I just want to stay like crystal clear, focused. And so we all know at any point that a board member is asked, what are you really going after this year, that we can say it. And that's my aspiration, is right there. And this is how we're going to do it in this pillar and this pillar and this pillar. And I feel like right now, if we look at our strategic plan, I don't know that if we could all clearly articulate, this is what we're going to do this year.
Well, and again, I apologize, Marina. I appreciate the opportunity to kind of ping pong back and forth here for just a minute, but I think you've really hit on it in the sense of, you remember me sharing with you earlier on George Russell's comment to me when I was doing equity work in Eugene. And he kept saying to me, Sue, you need to do differently. And I said, George, tell me what that means. And he said, just do different. And I think the do different here is exactly what you've described, which is, what is the one thing, I always share with my graduate students, don't ever say you're going to die on that hill, because you only get to do it once. Okay. You can say, this is a priority for me. This is where I draw a line. But the minute we say I'll die on that hill, and I've got 4 things on the list, well, you might want to be really thoughtful about that. So what are those things that then set us up for the next piece of work, right? And actually demonstrates, most importantly to this group here, that we are doing differently. Because eventually the rest will come with us, because we're able to articulate it and we're able to describe it. And part of doing differently also means that we have to be prepared that there may be families who will leave us, that we will experience white flight. And I have lived through that as well. And the fact of the matter is, all of our children were served well, even with that. They went to where they needed to go. I respect that. But we can't, that's part of also the backlash, and we cannot be afraid of that if we're really going to do this work well. And I think the fact that we've gone through the SSA process, community process is different now, right? There's work that can be done here. We can take it out to the community and engage them and say, how do we do? And where are the gaps? And as part of that process, teach at the same time. which is what educators are all about. So I promise that's it.
The reason the strategic plan is important for me is because I think it will say what it is that we want. So to me, they're one and the same. It's not, we know how to answer the question and we have a 20-page document. I don't think it will be 20 pages this time. And we have gone through the community process. We've learned a lot there. And our model, where we are much more following the collaborative governance that we've been learning right along with the administration. So it isn't starting with a blank page. It really is capturing what's going on already and then asking the questions of like, how do we measure? So I don't want to not have a strategic plan. It bothers me that we don't. And and so anyway, for me, it's one and the same for me.
Well, and Karen, I don't want to say we don't have a strategic plan. I think right now with a bunch of SBAC measurements, that's a challenge. I've always believed deeply in our cornerstones, right? I just want to simplify and focus, with equity maybe not being a standout, but being the foundation for all, right? I mean, that's just where, honestly, I'm just going to, in terms of the movement around hate speech that was really brought up through our students, right? That was a huge shift in our conversation and our thinking that brought forward a policy, right? That is, and again, we have to look at the equity policy. I'm starting to ramble. And so I don't want to have my sense of urgency and suggest that some of those critical pieces aren't important. I don't know. Again, Tara and John, and for the whole team, it's just that what's immediate, what's short, what's mid, what's long. How do we say this year was successful because we hit those milestones along the way? And that maybe will calm me down a little bit when we say, strategic plan, and I go, because it's going to take us a year and it's going to drive me crazy. And so that's probably where I am. So thank you all for humoring me.
Well, I think, remember, we've got the 20-page strategic plan, and then we've got the 4-page abbreviated version for public consumption. But I think what I actually heard was we all need to work as a board on an elevator speech. We need our 1 minute, what are we doing and why as a board?
But Jill, I disagree. The elevator speech will come because we're very clear on the work, right? That's just an outcome. Right? I mean, I understand what you're saying, but
it's like at the same time. I mean, but it's the short and sweet version that we can all recite because we know by heart what we're really doing, because we've honed it down to that level of focus.
And that's the beauty of different perspectives, because some of us will start with the short and sweet because it's clear and it's focused, and others of us will arrive at the short and sweet after we do the long-term, complex, plan. So both can be true at the same time.
And there's another layer to this work, which we're going to begin to discover as we do more of it, is it's got to be authentic for you, and how one person defines it. Not to say that you don't believe in it, but that may not be your authentic truth in how you show up in the work. And so if it's an elevator speech or a goal that you all share collectively, everyone has to know what it means for them to show up authentically in that goal. And so that's what takes a little more work, and in a way that can be different from some of the other work we do. Wow. Well, John and I have been like feverishly taking notes through all this. This is really good work, and I want to be mindful of time because we're over time now. Like I said before, our next steps will be to meet with each of you individually, and we can talk about these things a little bit more, like from your own unique perspective and in terms of how you show up show up for the work. I actually have a homework assignment for you. And I'm going to read this now, but don't worry, I'll throw it in the chat, and in the invitations, we'll make sure it's there too. Because there are going to be times where we have like big conversations like this, you know, that are larger. And sometimes it's going to come down to working on some specific technical skills and goals. So one of the things that I jotted down a little earlier were a couple of comments about the equity lens and using it, and how, you know, it isn't always just a natural, intuitive part of the decision making. And so my question for each of you is, I mean, even if you had it in front of you, because I recognize now it may not be as central, are there aspects that feel more natural and intuitive to draw upon, you know, looking at the various questions within an equity lens? And then which aspects of the equity lens are a little more challenging to remember and implement in your processes? And for both of those, for those that just kind of may come naturally, why do they come naturally for you? What is that connection that it's intuitive and a part of your process? And for those ones that are harder to remember or challenging to work with, why is that? And when you think about those questions, or even think about a specific situation where that question came up and it was tough for you, what feelings came up with that? And not just emotive feelings, but even like in your body. What are those sensations or changes in your body that happen? This is an area where we can think about, because there may be something blocking you. There may be something there that you don't fully understand, or that you don't trust yourself with. Or it could just be that you have to be more intentional. But let's explore that a little bit and unpack it. Because that's how we begin. The number one thing that you can do in this work is fully understand yourself and how you're showing up, and what triggers you, and what holds you back, and what excites you. And this is just one specific area in strategy that you're using as a team, where you can begin to unpack some of that. So does that make sense on the surface? Again, I know I just read it really fast, but I'll send it out to make sure you actually have it to think about.
So I'm a good student. So Tara, when is the homework due?
We're going to talk about this when we meet for the interviews. Good question. And this won't be the only thing we talk about, but it'll be a part of it. So you have some time to think about it. Wow, like I'm really kind of blown away right now. I thought this was such an incredible conversation and start to our time together. And I just feel incredibly honored that I get to be a part of this. And I'm excited to see what comes of this. Because I've already seen in my time working with TTSD some amazing things happen. And I'm excited to see that at every level and continue that growth. And I heard you, and I'm sure John heard you too, in the various things that you see as priorities, and understanding, like, you know, do we focus on the long term, the short term, the aspirational, the little pieces, and that can all be a part of the work that we talk about and do, because that is a part of the process, believe it or not. It's natural to have those questions. John, anything you want to add?
Well, I'm just reflecting on the first lines of the poem, of the poetry from Wendell Berry. And I'm just going to read them out loud, because this is a good place to be. It's when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. This is the real work. And it will be uncomfortable, and it will be unclear. And Tara and I are committed to work with you to arrive at clarity, to arrive at shared purpose in this work, to get to a place where we do know what to do, so that we will get to another place where we don't know what to do. But anyway, I appreciate the quotation that Xenia posted in the chat.
So I'm not sure. I don't see Xenia. Is Xenia? Oh, there she is. Okay. Because what I wanted, Tara and John, before you leave us to just get kind of just administrative in our one-on-one times, because I think what I was hoping before we move forward with operating agreements, although I feel like board goals are really going to be more defined through our work with you versus what our typical process has been, right? And operating agreements, as you would expect, are, I'm sure, can make sure that we send those to you. But it is that, kind of expectation of how we work together, and even what Karen said, but it's a series, and we have it written up in narrative format versus bullet format. But that was work that we still have ahead of us, and maybe that is continued to be extended as we work together, collectively. So I feel that these one-on-ones are a tremendous opportunity for each of us. And I wanted to kind of be clear on, is that a hope to get done next week? Is that a hope to get done in 2 weeks? So we kind of start to build a timeline, if you will.
This is where I look to Tara for leadership and clarity.
It's
And
funny
Tara's
because
looking at me.
I'm looking at you.
Who's going to pick this one?
So I am always of the mindset of let's get after it. So, the sooner we can meet, because this is for us, this is, like I said, a preliminary stage just for us to gather some context for going into the work. And so the sooner we can do that, the better. But we also recognize and respect the fact that, there's a lot going on, and sometimes people's calendars fill up pretty quickly. So as soon as we can do it, the better.
So we will move on it. It's a priority for us.
And if we're all in agreement, that means if one day you look at your calendar or something has been bumped off and John and I are there, you'll know why. I'm kidding. We're not going to bump things off of your calendar. But yeah, we'll definitely work on getting it scheduled. Anything else? Okay. So who's next? Cynthia, you there?
Who do we hand it to?
It goes to Maureen.
So, so first of all, Tara and John, thank you. And I just want to thank everybody for their participation. And I am a little bit stuck because what I wonder, I guess, to board members, have you read through our operating agreements, looked at our board goals? Is this, as we do this work with Tara and John, should we know what's there, put a pause button, talk to them as we do those kind of informational interviews, come back? I'm wrestling with how do we move forward with these documents currently, or do we, I'm just going to be quiet and take feedback, what you guys want to do, particularly with the operating agreements, because I do think the goals will be built and defined as we work with them.
That's basically what I was going to say, Maureen, is that I feel like I'm more comfortable with the operating agreements than I am with the board goals. I feel like the board goals need a lot of work relative to what we adopted last year, versus the operating agreements, I think of just kind of our standard protocol. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate that. It's 7:15. What I don't want to do is start with that. So I guess I do ask board members, right, to get your head kind of back in the operating agreements over the next week. And then Ben and I can work with Sue on figuring out when's that appropriate time to come back and do a reset. Because, and maybe just really reflect on those. And if there are some things that we really need to think about as a board, as we do this work with Tara and John, as we move forward in this year. So, just reflect on those, and we'll definitely address them in September. I mean, those need to be established and talked about as we work forward. And then the goals, to Ben's point, will build as we do this work with John and Tara. Does that make sense, you guys? Any comments or questions right now?
The only thought I was having, like even before tonight, was needing, I don't know if it's a paragraph, a section, or a sentence, but since the Zoom meeting format is so different than live, it seems like it needs to be, the Zoom thing needs to be addressed in our working agreements in some way. I mean, in general, I feel like the language has kind of continued year after year. If it's bullet points or sentences, either way. But something that is different and unique for this year that we weren't prepared for in March and April was doing this.
That's exactly what I was going to say too, is I feel like we need some acknowledgement of how does the board operate when we're all holed up in our houses? What's different? And maybe something about, extending grace to each other in that, since that's sometimes hard to come by.
Okay. Great feedback. Alrighty. Well, I think this is just a good opportunity to hand over to Dr. McCall and to Zinnia. And, guys, the one thing I think that on the strategic plan, what I think is this feels so different, right? These conversations and what we want to accomplish feels different. So I think my pushback is I don't want to do this the same way, right? The process has to be different, the system in which we create those. So that was probably my angst. Anyway, I want to extend, if any of you have a comment, and then we can switch to Dr. McCall and Zinnia, but it was kind of weighing on, it's just tugging at me. It's got to be different.
Well, it's been a lot of work. Again, as the board, as you do your work, it was really nice to be I would say, in the outside of the fishbowl, kind of looking in. And Zinni and I, we talked about, like, as you closed out this session, maybe doing an aha, an appreciation, or an apology. And as you reflect on your time together today, on each and every one of us. And again, on aha, an appreciation, or even an apology. And give you, go ahead, Zinnia.
Yeah, and I just put in the chat as well. I know that last week, Dr. Sue added, the achieve as well. And I think, one of the things that I've gotten from this session particularly is this idea, the aspiration of doing this hard work of equity. And so we want to offer, we add a couple more just so that you can offer some varying perspectives, the aha, appreciation, apology, and aspiration, or what you hope to achieve. So we'll throw that in there. And then the goal is to have everybody be able to share, so that it's not just folks. It feels weird to be in a fishbowl, right? To have these really poignant conversations in public takes a lot of courage and takes a lot of commitment. And I think so. with that said, just opening up the space. And I think these are the foundational moments that can, offer lots of opportunities for growth. So an aha, appreciation, an apology, an aspiration, or something you hope to achieve.
Yeah, and I would love to go first as a modeling our 5 A's. And I want to start with the aspiration. And this is the second of the 2 nights of the board retreat. And being a part of this experience, gives me great hope and aspiration that in community, we as a district can get the outcomes that I think we all want for our students, and particularly for our historically underserved students, our students of color, that it's been elusive for a lot of districts. And that aspiration is that this group, along with our staff, our district leaders, our families, our community partners, that we can do this work. And so an aspiration is that it's hard work, but it's something that I feel that we can accomplish. Yeah. Who else? Let's see. I think I just want to call on folks. I'm going to start with who's in my left corner, and I see Jill. What about you? One of the 5 A's.
I'd like to make an appreciation to Zinnia. What you said earlier, in your vulnerability earlier, was touching, and I appreciate it. And you never cease to amaze me at your ability to model the very behavior you're talking about with us, and it makes it so much easier. And so I just wanted to say thank you.
Okay. Karen.
Well, I have an apology for not listening for impact before I spoke. So specifically, I guess, to Zinnia, but to the group, since there could have been impact group-wide.
Okay. I'm going down the list with, I see Patty.
So I have an appreciation for our organization taking this on. It's, I think about it and it's like, oh my gosh, this is so big. And then it's like mind blown. It's so much bigger than big. And it's just that we're taking steps to make ourselves better, our organization better, that will impact so many people, so many students, so many families. It's overwhelming.
Thank you. Rowan.
I would have to say I'm very appreciative of a lot of things from today. Both of our panelists that came on, Tara and John, I think, right?
Yes.
And additionally, getting to hear from Zinnia was also great, as well as the feedback and the input from everyone. I really appreciate it and the opportunity.
Thank you. Carol.
I appreciate a lot of things about all of you. In particular, though, the last thing that's sticking with me is Maureen's appreciation for Maureen to say, how is this different? How are we acting different? How are we doing this different? what are we using different forms? Are we talking to each other differently? Because as I was listening to you before that, I kept thinking, how is this going to be different? How is this going to be different? So I appreciate that about everybody.
Thank you. Ben?
I think for me, I've just been reflecting on, I think my appreciation is that as a board, and Maureen, I think this goes to you, we spent our board retreat primarily focused on the issue of equity, which is uncommon amongst districts in Oregon for sure. So I feel grateful to be part of that.
Thank you. Emily?
I had an aha moment when Zinnia was talking about how she had experienced abuse of hurt and being conditioned to certain circumstances and having those imprints that left an impact. So, and I also appreciated that a lot because I hadn't thought of it before.
Okay. Sharon?
Well, I could probably think of every one of these A's. But I, just reflecting on the last 6 hours, it's been really good. I really feel like this has been a really constructive, great conversations. The panelists have been amazing. John and Tara seems like they're going to be really beneficial. So, and just everything, I'm just learning a lot of time to reflect. So, really enjoyed digging into the resources that we were given last week, and trying to think differently, like especially, I can't remember the name of the school now that Ronnie sent us. They were dancing and singing in the classroom and standing on their desks. That's different. So yeah, that's going to be a challenge, but it'll be interesting.
Nice. Maureen?
An apology to listen more, just to take Karen's sharing. I'm going to pivot that to an immense gratitude for this team and just the tremendous knowledge and heart and that brings to do this work. And so an apology to just focus on listening more. So thank you.
Todd?
Yeah, I would just share an appreciation for, again, kind of what I was mentioning before, for a school board that is engaging fully in this work, and rounding out a K-12 system includes a school board without a doubt. So I really appreciate that, and we've got to keep the pedal to the metal. It's hard work, but it's work that we can't be 3, 4, 5 more years down the road saying, well, this is hard work, and not seeing the results of us collectively really not only hammering out policy, but and from a board perspective and district leadership perspective that makes a difference, but also changing our culture. And so regardless of who's in the seats we sit in and who's in our classrooms as teachers and so on, that we've created a culture that is sustainable and that does right by kids and families. And so I appreciate the efforts tonight.
Tracy?
I might be cheating a little bit. I think this is just a convergence of all the A's. At first it was an aha, and then I'm like, no, it's an appreciation. That's what happens when you leave me to the end. It's like I'm all over the place. But I think what I'm really centered on is the fact that although everybody that I'm looking at, everybody that's here comes to the table their unique selves, that everybody has, everybody's committed to this. And so I'm humbled always, especially with Zinnia's vulnerability this evening. I heard the word grace a few times. So I'm just, I guess maybe I lean towards that aspiration and the hope. I look at our students who are going to hold us accountable at every step, which is exactly what we need. And the fact that they choose to be here with us is so inspiring. So I'm just really humbled and excited.
Thank you. Zinnia?
Hi, so I'm going to share this one more time just because I feel like it's so in the moment. It's by Wendell Berry. For me, I can't even express to you my appreciation for this collective group of folks that we're here today. When we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And when we no longer know which way to go, we have begun our journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded spring is the one that sings. And I don't think you all fully grasp what you're doing right now. I think one of the strengths that I have is to be able to do the micro macro. And when you really talk about what is it really going to take for our organization to do this equity work and sustain it, what we experienced today was a process of rehumanization of our souls, our connection to one another, and our commitment to this work as human beings, flawed, but adaptive and resilient. So I just wanted to offer that to the group and know that with great gratitude and just the vulnerability that you all took today. Thank you.
A lot of gratitude. David.
My big aha was the reminder that we're in the 5th year of our current strategic plan.
Wow.
I don't know why I didn't think of it before now, but I can remember, seems like yesterday we were having that community process to develop the current strategic plan. And just a statement to the board that, you can do this and we all can do this. Think about all the things we've done as a group the last 12 months. And you can pretty much name all of them. At the center of it has been students and equity. And we did half of it remotely. So go team.
That's something to be proud of. Dr. Sue, will you close us out?
Way to go, David, stealing my stuff. All right. And that's what I appreciate a great deal about you, David, is that I've said it many times that for someone in finance to have the heart of an educator is a rare gift indeed. And so I'm always grateful. And I'm appreciation, again, from me to this board, to our students for being willing to engage in this work and to do it publicly. To the team that's assembled here for all the work that you have done up to this point, and I know will continue to do. Zinnia, it is a great pleasure and a great honor to be able to do this work with you and Dr. Lisa. And I am reminded this evening of a scripture from my faith practice that says, to gain one's life, you must lose it. To gain one's life, you must be willing to lose it. So when I think about what this work requires of me as a leader, and to show full appreciation for all the effort and work that you all have committed to, I have to be willing to continue and to expand the way in which I lead that throws caution to the wind. And where most superintendents will be looking to dusting off their resume for the next opportunity, I have to be willing, and I am, to throw that kind of caution to the wind and lead as I know and what my core beliefs are to help this work come to fruition and to move it forward. So that's the best way I know to support the work that you've begun here this evening. So with that, Chair Wolf, I send it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sue. I just in final, you know, Ben was kind to call me out on the equity experiences we've had, but I would be remiss to not acknowledge Tracy, Zinnia, and Lisa for creating these opportunities for us to sit and think and work with these amazing community members. And so I think it's had us in a great path. Sue, thank you for your vision on how we're going to head down this path. And yeah, I think that's it. It's 7:05. I'm sure everyone's ready to process and maybe go get something to eat. Board members, Emily, Rowan, any final words? I'll open it up. Okay. Alrighty. Well, thank you all. The work continues. Look for those emails from John and Tara so we can keep doing this work and keep it moving. So, guys, all have a great night.
Night all.